I never thought a quiet night at the lakehouse could turn into one of the most shocking moments of my life. I woke up at 4 a.m., the kind of early morning when the world feels suspended, and I thought I heard shovels scraping against dirt. At first, I convinced myself it was just the wind or an animal digging somewhere near the old oak tree. But then I saw my son moving outside, working under the moonlight with a precision that made my heart sink. Something wasn't right. I wrapped myself in my robe, barely breathing, and watched as he and his wife carried out their task with such care that it almost looked routine. That's when I realized I needed to see it for myself. When I stepped outside, the freshly turned earth was impossible to ignore. My hands trembled as I knelt to dig, my slippers slipping against the damp grass. Beneath the soil, there was a metal lockbox, sealed tight, almost like it had been waiting for me to find it. Dirt clung to its edges, and for a moment I hesitated, staring at it and wondering if I should just walk away. But curiosity, and perhaps the faint instinct that I deserved to know the truth, pushed me forward. Inside the box were documents that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. There was a will, financial records, and a letter from my grandson, Tyler. Reading that letter, I felt a chill run through me. Tyler had overheard plans that no child should ever know about. Plans that could have harmed me. And yet, in the middle of my fear and confusion, I realized something important. I wasn't helpless. Not anymore. I think that's what I want anyone listening to feel right now. Even in moments when everything seems out of control, when the people closest to you might be hiding secrets, there is still a chance to take a breath, steady yourself, and find a way to reclaim your life. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, the lockbox open before me, thinking about the months I had trusted my son to guide me through decisions about my own home, my finances, my future. And now I understood that trusting blindly had put me at risk. As the sky began to lighten with dawn, I made a quiet promise to myself I would uncover every truth, protect my grandson, and finally see this story through. But first, I had to take a deep breath and remember what had brought me here, the love I had for my family, and the lessons my husband had quietly tried to leave behind. I had thought that losing Harold last March was the worst thing I would face. 43 years of marriage, and suddenly I was alone in a house full of memories, trying to navigate grief while the world moved on without me. I remember sitting in our bedroom, his favorite chair empty, the sunlight falling across the desk where he used to organize every bill, every note, every plan for the future. Harold had always been meticulous, always thinking 2 steps ahead, and I trusted him completely. After he passed, David and his wife Sarah stepped in with a concern that felt almost nurturing at first. They made themselves indispensable, offering to handle what they called the complicated paperwork, to ease my burden. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to lean on my son, especially during such a fragile time. I told myself they were helping because they loved me. But there was a subtle pressure, a kind of persuasive insistence that made me second-guess myself. I thought I was just overwhelmed by grief, unable to manage bank statements or legal forms. I remember thinking I would never have the energy to go through Harold's study, that I could rely on David to summarize things for me. Harold had left clear instructions to review everything myself, but I felt incapable. I rationalized it as sparing myself unnecessary stress, never realizing that surrendering that control would leave me blind to what was happening behind my back. And then there was Tyler, My grandson, a quiet boy, usually full of life, who had grown distant over the months following Harold's passing. I had chalked it up to typical teenage behavior. But in hindsight, I see now that he had been carrying the weight of knowledge far too heavy for his age. He had overheard conversations meant to stay secret, conversations about money, control, and plans that no child should ever hear. I would spend hours wandering the lake house, sitting on the porch Harold loved, replaying the weeks before his death. I remembered the small gestures, the subtle way David would suggest selling the houses, how Sarah would mention community living for someone like me, as if 67 years automatically meant I was fragile, incapable, and disposable. Each comment, each suggestion seemed small on its own, but together they formed a pattern that my grief had blinded me to. Looking back, I can see that the love I felt for my family had been manipulated. I had been navigating sorrow, thinking I was surrounded by support, when in truth, I was being cornered, nudged toward choices that weren't mine to make. And it was in those quiet, reflective moments that I began to sense a thread of danger, a truth I hadn't yet allowed myself to confront, that my son and his wife might not be the protectors they pretended to be. I remember feeling a strange combination of dread and clarity, the kind that hits you when the familiar suddenly becomes unfamiliar. I knew that to protect myself, I would need to uncover what had been hidden, and to do that, I needed to understand how deep the deception went. The first step would come in the early morning when the shovels scraped against the damp earth outside my window, a step that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. This awareness led me to the moment when I would discover the lockbox, and that discovery would force me to confront not only my son and daughter-in-law, but also my own assumptions, my own trust, and the lessons Harold had quietly tried to leave for me. I could barely breathe as I stepped outside, the chill of the early morning seeping through my robe and slippers. The hole near the old oak tree looked freshly dug, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. My hands moved almost automatically as I knelt to dig, the soil soft and cold beneath my fingers. Each scoop revealed more of the box beneath, a metal lockbox that seemed impossibly heavy with secrets. When I finally freed it from the dirt, holding it against my chest, I felt a mix of fear and urgency. My son and daughter-in-law had thought I was asleep. They had assumed I was the grieving widow too fragile to notice, too trusting to question anything. But here I was, holding proof that they had been hiding something far more than just papers. Opening the lockbox was like opening a door to months of deception I had been blind to. Inside were documents that confirmed my deepest suspicions and more. The will, dated just weeks before Harold died, showed that everything was meant for me, and that David and Sarah were only secondary beneficiaries if something happened to me. The version David had presented to me months earlier had been carefully falsified. Then, there were the bank statements transfers I had never authorized, investments I didn't know existed. My hands shook as I realized how much they had manipulated the flow of money I thought I had control over. And then, almost impossibly, I found the letter from Tyler. My grandson had written to Harold, confessing what he had overheard and begging for my protection. The child had carried this burden silently, afraid of his own parents, trying to safeguard both me and Harold without knowing if anyone would listen. I sank to the kitchen floor, clutching the lockbox as the dawn began to creep through the windows. The weight of betrayal hit me harder than grief had. I remembered all the times I had allowed David and Sarah to guide me through financial decisions. To help me handle affairs I was perfectly capable of managing. Each act of trust now felt like a step into a trap I hadn't seen coming. And yet, among the shock and fear, a sense of clarity began to emerge. This was my life, my home, my responsibility, and I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how close, strip that away from me. I realized for the first time in months that I still had a choice. I could let this continue, living under the manipulation of the people I had once called my family. Or I could take control and face the truth, holding the documents, feeling the embossed weight of the lockbox. I knew that the next steps would be dangerous, uncertain, but necessary. Harold had tried to warn me, to give me the tools I needed. Now, it was up to me to use them. As I sat there, the sun rising slowly over the lake, I promised myself that I would uncover every secret, protect Tyler, and finally confront the people who had thought they could outsmart both my husband and me. I didn't yet know how I would do it, but I knew I had to begin. And the lockbox had given me the first piece of the puzzle. This discovery led me to reflect on the past months, the subtle manipulations, the emotional pressures that had gone unnoticed, and it was that reflection that would guide me into the next phase, uncovering the full depth of their betrayal. Sitting at the kitchen table with the lockbox still open, I began to replay the months after Harold passed, piecing together the little moments that now screamed of manipulation. I remembered David's subtle remarks about the lakehouse, the way he questioned whether I could manage the maintenance or the property taxes, as if I were suddenly incapable. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking it was concern. Now I see it was a strategy, one carefully designed to make me doubt my own judgment. Sarah's involvement had been equally quiet, but persistent. I recalled the way she suggested I consider downsizing, not once, but repeatedly, painting images of cozy apartments and low-maintenance living, always emphasizing how practical it would be for me. Each suggestion seemed harmless, even caring. But looking back, they formed a pattern, a constant push to make me relinquish control of what Harold and I had built. Even Tyler had been affected. He grew distant, quieter at family gatherings. His usual energy dimmed. I didn't understand it at the time, but now it was clear he had been carrying a heavy secret, terrified of what might happen if he spoke up. That small boy, the one who used to laugh freely, was forced into silence because of the adults around him. I felt a mixture of anger and sorrow, knowing how unfair that burden had been. David and Sarah didn't stop at persuasion. They began managing documents I should have reviewed myself, filling in gaps, creating summaries that left out critical details. I had trusted them blindly, thinking I was sparing myself unnecessary stress, never realizing that by stepping back, I had handed over the keys to my own life. Each signed paper, each approval I gave under their guidance was unknowingly a piece of a much larger puzzle. And yet, within that realization, I began to see signs of hope. Harold had left hints, subtle safeguards in his meticulous records, waiting for me to notice them. The letters, the way documents were stored, even the timing of certain transfers, all of it pointed to a truth he wanted me to uncover. The betrayal was deep, yes, but it also contained a roadmap to reclaiming my life. Sitting there, I let myself feel the full range of emotions, the shock, the hurt, the rising anger, and then the determination. I could no longer allow myself to be passive. I could not let months of deceit continue unchecked. I knew I needed a strategy, one that would protect Tyler, recover what was rightfully mine, and finally confront the people who had thought they could manipulate me without consequence. The quiet of the morning gave me a strange clarity. I thought about how far I had let this go, how trust and love had been exploited, and how close I had come to losing everything. But I also felt something else, strength that had been honed through grief, through decades of raising a family, through years of learning to navigate life with intelligence and care. That strength was mine to wield now. With that resolve, I began planning the steps that would lead to the confrontation, the evidence gathering, and ultimately to ensuring David and Sarah could not continue their deception. The first step would be cautious, precise, and deliberate, and it would begin by reaching out to Tyler, understanding exactly what he knew and how we could use that knowledge to protect ourselves. After hours of reflection, I realized that reacting impulsively could make things worse. I needed a plan, one that would protect both myself and Tyler. The first step was finding the right ally, someone who understood the intricacies of family disputes and could guide me without judgment. That's when I remembered Harold had once mentioned a lawyer, someone known for handling complicated estate matters with precision and discretion. I knew it was time to reach out. I began organizing the documents, carefully making copies, noting dates and details, every transfer, every version of the will. And Tyler's letter became pieces of evidence I needed to secure before confronting anyone. I found a small safety deposit box at a local bank to hold the most critical items, and for the originals, I entrusted them to a close friend with instructions only to open them if something happened to me. It was the first time in months that I felt a glimmer of control. Next, I needed to understand exactly what Tyler had witnessed. I remembered the moments he had grown distant, the way his laughter had dimmed, and I realized he had been protecting me in his own way. I spoke with him gently, explaining that he had done the right thing by confiding in Harold through his letter. I reassured him that he was safe, and that together we could take steps to ensure no one could harm us. Hearing him quietly express his fears and the weight he had carried made my heart ache, but it also steeled my resolve. I also had to create the illusion that everything was normal. David and Sarah had to believe I was still the grieving, compliant mother they thought they could manipulate. Every phone call, every message, every interaction was carefully managed so that I could gather information without raising suspicion. I felt a mixture of sadness and determination, knowing that the act of appearing vulnerable was necessary to protect the truth. By the time I returned to the lakehouse, I had mapped out a careful approach. I would go back, spend time alone, and observe without interference. I would maintain routines, let them think their influence was intact, and wait for the right moment to act. I also reminded myself to be patient, to trust in the plan Harold had unknowingly set into motion through his careful documents. Sitting in that quiet house, watching the sunlight filter through the windows, I felt the first real sense of hope in months. The path ahead was daunting, and the confrontation would require courage, precision, and timing. But for the first time since Harold's death, I believed that justice, understanding, and protection for Tyler were within reach. I knew that the next step would demand all of my focus and resolve the confrontation that would change everything. The evening of the dinner felt surreal. I prepared Harold's favorite meal, arranging the table as if nothing unusual was about to happen. Pot roast, vegetables, fresh rolls, and apple pie filled the kitchen with familiar smells, the kind of comfort that reminded me of countless family dinners. I wanted David and Sarah to see the Eleanor they expected, the grieving, compliant mother, but beneath that calm exterior, I felt the pulse of control I had regained. As they arrived, I noticed the subtle ease in their faces, the relief that I seemed harmless, distracted by old routines. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay present, and to let the night unfold as planned. Every movement, every gesture was deliberate. I could feel the tension beneath their calm, the anticipation of what they believed would be a normal evening. I had arranged for a small, inconspicuous recording device, the kind Harold had suggested through his careful preparation. It lay hidden, capturing every conversation that might reveal their intentions. Listening to the tone, the words they chose, I felt a mixture of sorrow and satisfaction. The people I had loved and trusted were now exposing themselves without even realizing it. The dinner moved slowly, almost deliberately, allowing time for them to reveal their true nature. As they discussed the houses, the finances, and the supposed benefits of downsizing, I remained quiet, reflecting inwardly on the months of manipulation and deceit. Every suggestion, every pointed remark, became evidence of the larger scheme I had uncovered. Later, in the courtroom, I felt the full weight of what had been hidden. Tyler's testimony, calm and precise, detailed everything he had overheard, the plans he had feared to share, and the moments that had threatened our safety. Listening to him, I felt both heartbreak for the burden he had carried and immense pride for his courage. The evidence from the lockbox, combined with Harold's foresight, laid bare the calculated deception of David and Sarah. The recordings captured their own voices, confirming what Tyler had written and what the documents showed. David's plans to manipulate, control, and even endanger me were undeniable. Sarah's complicity, her careful efforts to maintain appearances while supporting his schemes, became painfully clear. The pattern of betrayal that had haunted me for months was now visible to everyone, undeniable and irrefutable. Watching them face the consequences, I felt a mixture of emotions: sorrow for the family I had hoped we could be, relief that Tyler and I were safe, and a quiet satisfaction that justice, finally, had been served. The weight of fear lifted slowly, replaced by clarity and the knowledge that we had survived something unimaginable. That night, I reflected on how far I had come from the frightened widow who hesitated to examine documents to the woman who had uncovered deception, protected her grandson, and reclaimed her life. The confrontation had been intense, exhausting, and emotionally charged, but it was necessary. I realized then that strength often comes quietly, through patience, observation, and the courage to act when the time is right. As I left the courtroom that evening, I felt a deep sense of resolution. The next steps would involve rebuilding, understanding, and ensuring a future free from manipulation. But for the first time in months, I felt a peace that was hard-earned, knowing that Tyler and I were safe and that the truth had prevailed. The weeks after the courtroom felt surreal, like waking from a long, tense dream. Tyler and I slowly began to rebuild our lives, finding comfort in routines we had missed for so long. I moved into a smaller, manageable home, not because anyone pressured me, but because I wanted a space that reflected who I was now: independent, alert, and free from manipulation. Tyler adjusted quickly, reconnecting with his biological father in California and meeting his half-sister. Gaining a family he had never known, while still spending time with me? It was a balance of security, love, and discovery. A life that felt intentional rather than dictated by others. I found myself savoring simple moments, morning coffee on the porch, helping Tyler with his homework, laughing again at his jokes, feeling the warmth of safety I hadn't known for months. There were reminders of Harold everywhere, small treasures and memories that reminded me of his foresight and love. His meticulous planning had protected both Tyler and me, even in his absence. I realized that strength comes quietly, often in the spaces where we think we are weakest. Trusting my instincts, being patient, and honoring Harold's guidance had allowed me to survive the betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable. I had regained control of my life, and in doing so, I found a renewed sense of purpose and hope. If there is one thing I hope anyone listening takes from this, it's that even in moments of fear, grief, or deception, there is always a way to protect yourself and those you love. There is strength in patience, clarity in observation, and power in acting with purpose. I hope you carry that thought with you, and maybe even share a story of resilience from your own life, so we can remind each other of the courage that often hides quietly within us.